A few years ago I spent some time, not a lot of time, I spent a small amount of time in this community, I think it was in North Yorkshire, but it might have been Derbyshire, called Botton Village, which is, it was like a little community which had some unusual things about it. Firstly, it was an integrated community of adults with Down syndrome largely, and adults without those kind of syndromes, but it was a completely integrated community, so there wasn't a sense of carers and the being cared for. It was, as I say, it was an integrated community. But also some other things about it is that the community itself was all run on Steiner principles, or anthroposophical principles. And there was a farm there, an organic farm, which kind of ran on those principles. There was a few workshops, you know, making kind of craft-based things. There was a kind of meeting hall where they used to do this thing called eurythmy, which is this weird kind of movement form. And but the bit that I was most intrigued by was they had a laboratory there, quite a well-equipped laboratory actually. And I got to look around and meet the chap who was running the laboratory. And the experiments we're doing there were weird, I have to say. You know, I mean, I've got a little bit of a science background, not much, but I know enough to find it strange. I mean, the whole thing seemed to be about trying to find scientific connections. So the only one I can remember was this thing where they would do, filter certain substances. Filter certain substances. When you put them through filter papers, what you get is a kind of set of concentric rings, jagged-edged rings on the filter paper, according to how the various solids within the substances, within the solutions, filter out. And he was doing this, and then comparing the shape, trying to find some logic for this in the shape that was made by these filtrates on the filter paper. It makes no sense at all. It's completely bogus. But that's the kind of thing. It was all about looking for correlations in the way that the world worked on that kind of level. And I was talking to him about this, and it's expressed aim. You know, that was the expressed aim of the laboratory. You know, he gave the example of a kind of ideal in which you know, you'd look out over the field and there'd be an arrangement of sheep in the field, and from the arrangement of sheep in the field you would be able to make predictions about a person's health, because if, you know, everything is kind of connected. It was that thing, so that there is a tissue of causality and a tissue of correspondences in that way of thinking between, you know, the random movements of sheep across the field and all of the other kind of systems that eventually lead to a person's internal health. Completely bogus in my opinion, but fascinating. But one of the things that really struck me is, of course, you know, these experiments that he'd been doing for several years were not giving any results at all. None. Zero. There was no positive results coming out of it. But he kept doing it, and he was very, very committed to it, and he was very wedded to the meaningfulness of the kind of overall paradigm that he was working with, and the various hypotheses that generated these experiments. You know, the overall paradigm being one of connectedness, and of a kind of readability of that connectedness and interpretability of it. And as I say, all the experiments that came out of that, and the hypotheses that fueled these experiments, exemplified that without any evidence at all. And I suppose why I'm reminded of this is something I was talking about yesterday in a video, and I've been thinking about again this morning, which is this feeling of meaning. You know, he was constantly, he was working in this lab for several years, and he was a very nice guy. He had a PhD in physics, and he'd obviously been confronted pretty much every day in that laboratory of the complete absence of any support for these ideas. But he kept coming back to it. He kept coming back to it. And I mean, the cognitive dissonance must have been huge. But his conviction in the rightness of his ideas and the rightness of the paradigm was such that it completely overwhelmed any evidence to the contrary, and just kept him going in there every day, waiting for the day when the sheep in the field would be readable and the filtrates on the filter paper would mark out a shape that was interpretable and having some kind of cosmic significance. Yeah, I think it's to do with that stuff I was talking about yesterday, as I say, that meaning has these two components, and I'm borrowing from Eugene Gendlin here. One is to do with the relationship between symbols, or in the case of this laboratory, between the relationship between sheep in the field and the person's health. And this second component, which is the felt nature of that meaning, which is completely embedded within the human. It doesn't just lie in the symbols, it lies in the human engagement with that. And for this chap certainly, and I think for a lot of people who are invested in meaningfulness generally, the meaning component was completely present and almost unassailable. The felt sense of that meaningfulness, even in the complete absence of any supporting evidence.